Thank you all for coming. Welcome. My name is Jonathan Silk. I'm a professor in the study of Buddhism in Leiden University. And it's my pleasure and my honor to introduce our guest this evening. First, just very briefly to tell you that we teach and do research in a range of areas concerned with Buddhist culture and Tibetan culture. Here in Leiden University, we teach classical Tibetan language, we teach Sanskrit, Chinese, Japanese, Korean. We offer a range of courses from Introduction to Buddhism through several specialized courses, including a course, in fact, the next term, in Tibetan Buddhism. We offer a variety of degrees which allow one to concentrate in the study of Buddhism. If you're further interested in anything about this, please feel free to contact me. Our guest this evening is Khenpo Sodargye, as you know. He was born in Kham, in eastern Tibet in 1962, ordained as a monk in 1985. He studied at Larung Gar, founded by his master, Khenpo Sodargye. This eventually became a huge complex, offering monastic education and religious support to surrounding communities. It nominally belongs to the Nyingma school, and particularly to the Dzogchen orientation, but overall is rather ecumenical. There are many reasons that Larung Gar is interesting, among these being that, like the great monastic universities of the past, but rather rare today, it draws students from across the Tibetan world. Moreover, it is the first such monastic university to grant women the degree of Khenpo, roughly the PhD for monastics in this tradition. A great many Han Chinese have also been drawn to Larung Gar. It was in this sort of environment then that our guest, Khenpo Sodargye, was trained, studying a range of scholastic topics. Fluent in both Tibetan and Chinese, he has become one of the most well-known advocates of Tibetan Buddhism, especially in China. Moreover, he has made great efforts to speak at universities both within China and outside, particularly in Europe and North America. This evening, we are pleased that he has made time earlier in the day for discussions with students, and this evening, we are pleased to welcome him here in this large hall in Leiden University for a discussion with Dr. Berthe Jansen, a specialist in Tibetan monasticism. Our format this evening will be that Dr. Jansen will conduct a discussion with Khenpo, who will speak in Chinese, which will be translated by Ms. Jansen. After this conversation, audience members will be invited to ask questions. Leiden University is delighted to welcome Khenpo Sodargye here, and we look forward to an interesting discussion.
Good evening, everyone. So I am meant to be moderating this discussion tonight. My name is Berthe Jansen. And the title of this talk tonight, the thing that we were initially interested in, is the appeal of Tibetan Buddhism to the young and the urban, particularly within mainland China. And this is something that we have seen, obviously, after the opening up or the freeing up of religious practice in Tibetan areas, in Chinese areas. And this has obviously brought about a lot of changes. And my first question or topic I would request Khenpo to speak about is exactly what kind of, since the opening up of religious freedom, the loosening of the control on religious freedom or religious practice, what has changed both in Tibetan areas and in other areas in the PRC?
As for Dr. Jansen's question raised just now, I hadn't really thought about it before. But in fact, when it comes to the openness or restriction in religion, personally, I can be considered a witness to history. Because when religion was not open, including my own monastery from my hometown, has been destroyed by fire, with nothing left but ruins and walls. When we herded cattle within the ruins of the burned walls, we were still able to occasionally find some fragments of tankas, Buddhist scriptures, and statues of the Buddha. Since 1980, with the relaxation of religious policies, Tibetan monasteries began to return to normal. Many original monasteries throughout Tibetan area began to restore their normal functions and began to be rebuilt. The original monastics living in monasteries also had gained the opportunities to study in the monasteries. So the Larung Gar 5 Sciences Buddhist Academy, where I am now, was established after the religious opening up in 1980. The monastery I just mentioned back in my hometown, which is located quite near Larung Gar, had also been restored since then. Of course, similar situations like this are probably quite evident in many other places. Here, I think since it directly relates to the main topic that we are currently discussing and exploring in detail today, I'd just like to spend some more time here to offer a brief analysis about it. Originally, your country, the Netherlands, in a certain geographical and societal sense, has some notable differences compared to our culture and many other aspects of our way of life. For example, I personally come from Tibetan area where the altitude is above 4,000 meters. In comparison, you live in places where the elevation is even below sea level in some areas. So geographically, the difference is quite significant. But I think that we share some common points, such as some life goals, wonderful aspirations, as well as the pains and joys we all experience. In these respects, we share a common understanding and have a common language. Personally, my experience of communicating with Han Buddhism, that is through Tibetan Buddhism, I have also engaged in exchanges with young people in major cities in China. It's been nearly 30 years up to this year. So from my personal experience, I can also share a bit with all of you. Tibetan area is a place that many people deeply long for, whether they are Han Chinese or Westerners. They feel that there is a sense of mystery there. Nowadays, it attracts a great many people from all walks of life. From a certain perspective, why does Tibet continue to attract such a great number of people? As you know, Tibetan area's overall economic situation is very underdeveloped and the climate is extremely harsh. Moreover, inconvenient transport and other factors make the trip very difficult. But I think that what attracts so many people is not necessarily their environment or other such reasons. Mainly it is because of their faith and sense of happiness. And the source of this is actually Tibetan Buddhism. Tibetan area is relatively underdeveloped. Why does it attract people from more advanced places? Western science is actually highly developed. Science and humanistic culture in Han region should also be quite well developed. Logically speaking, the underdeveloped shouldn't be able to attract the advanced. But for us living in this world, at this very moment, there is a need for a dual aspect, both spiritual and material levels. For many people, their material lives are well developed, but perhaps they face many complex issues on the spiritual side. This is no exception for young people today. I think that young people, on one hand, really have many advantages because, young people are full of enthusiasm and passion, and they possess a great deal of creativity and imagination. They really want that in their own precious lives. They can enjoy a very happy and joyful life, while also making significant contributions to society and humanity. That's exactly why they're so often referred to as passionate youth, full of energy and enthusiasm. Young people possess a cheerful spirit and abundant passion. These are the advantages of many young people. As for middle-aged people, aside from the young, they may not have as much enthusiasm as the young, because when a person reaches a certain age, whether it's in terms of relationship, daily life or work, they feel like that's all there is to it. No matter how hard you strive in life, once you've enjoyed it all, there really isn't much else beyond that. However, middle-aged people have a wealth of experience as well as a certain depth of life experience. They possess mature thinking in many aspects. So nowadays, why is that Buddhism attracts so many young people? Actually, as for young people, they don't completely believe in authority or dogma at face value. Young people possess an open mindset and a diversity of cultures. As long as the pursuits are reasonable and convincing to them, they are willing to accept them. If there are not proper and sufficient reasons, especially in today's technologically advanced era with such a developed internet, young people are unwilling to accept it. Some may even question the words of religious leaders or what their parents tell them. They may not necessarily accept it. Regarding the question Dr. Jansen just asked, I can give everyone a concise and summarized explanation. I will answer from several aspects. First, I believe that Tibetan Buddhism is relatively complete and comprehensive. Nowadays, people who believe in Buddhism, including the young from mainland China and all over the world, are steadily and continuously increasing because Tibetan Buddhist teachings encompass that from Theravada and Northern Buddhism. Northern Buddhism is especially popular in Japan and China. Theravada Buddhism thrives in countries such as Thailand and Myanmar. In fact, the scriptures and doctrinal treatises of both Theravada Buddhism and Northern Buddhism, as well as certain precepts and practices, can in fact be found within Tibetan Buddhism. Moreover, it can meet the needs of their followers. Whereas in other traditions, such as Theravada Buddhism, you may not find the teachings of Northern Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism. And in Northern Buddhism, you may also not necessarily find certain teachings unique to Tibetan Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism. I believe that nowadays, many of us who believe in Buddhism possess a multicultural background. In other words, there are all kinds of believers. To meet their needs, it is necessary to have a multicultural mindset within. Only then can it be accepted. So first of all, it should be said that Tibetan Buddhism is very comprehensive and complete. Perhaps some of you may not fully believe this, but if you have time, I hope you can take a look in Tibetan Buddhist Tripitaka, where there are both Sutrayana and Tantrayana, totaling 108 volumes. As for the treatises among it, there are 213 volumes from Indian eminent masters. There are also works by eminent Tibetan monks, and each person's works are extremely numerous. So if we truly study Tibetan Buddhism, you may be surprised to find that all-encompassing Buddhist philosophies are contained within it without any exceptions. This is the first point. Secondly, Tibetan Buddhism is, by its very nature, highly logical indeed. Nowadays, people in cities tend to be skeptical. They often have a lot of doubts, and their thoughts are quite chaotic and confused. But when many problems are solved through religion, some religions rely solely on faith, without directly providing you with a very clear explanation from a theoretical or logical perspective. But the Buddhist logic, Pramana, in Tibetan Buddhism, yesterday I discussed this with the doctor. She also once in Tibetan Buddhism have learned a lot of Buddhist logic. In fact, this structured method of debate completely aligns with the debate philosophies found in some international universities today. If you have any doubts or opinions and you feel the other's viewpoint is unreasonable, you can openly refute and even overturn it. This is something that is very difficult to do in other religions and even in other branches of Buddhism. That's why in Tibetan Buddhism a lot of time is patiently, carefully and thoughtfully devoted to this important practice. Learn some very powerful debate to really sharpen one's own thinking. This way of thinking is especially suitable for many young people today, especially those in cities. When you have a lot of doubts, you can bring your questions to the monastery and you can debate them with your guru. If you can't win the debate, you can learn from him. But if you do win the debate, you don't need to learn from him and just overturn their viewpoint. This kind of very open-minded thinking fits modern generation. It's suitable for the current era in the 21st century. If any of you are interested in debate, there is a PhD here who has studied Buddhist logic. I also studied Buddhist logic and debate when I was young. Later, when it comes time for questions, you don't need to hold back. You can debate freely. This is what I mean by its logical nature. There's also something called systematicness. Tibetan Buddhism should certainly have a very complete system, starting from the basics and then step by step. Its theories and practices are all organized in a thorough sequence. For example, in Tibetan Buddhism, you start with the preliminary practices, then you move on to the 5 great treatises, logic, Vinaya, Madhyamika, Prajna, and the Abhidharmakosha. There are also various stages in Vajrayana, Tantric Buddhism. This kind of step-by-step progression is especially in line with some of the methods we use in the modern world. From elementary school to middle school and then high school. I'm not sure if there's high school in the Netherlands, and then university all the way to graduate and doctoral studies. This kind of sequence, and moreover this very sequence, for example, in our Buddhist academy at Larung Gar, which is located in Tibet, from the basics of Buddhist studies all the way to graduation, it takes 15 years. Our general study now currently 15 years is duration. Within those 15 years, you can further pursue advanced studies to become a great master. So I feel this kind of systematic approach and method is quite rare nowadays in many religions, and even in other branches of Buddhism. It's not commonly seen. Moreover, Tibetan Buddhism has a certain scientific quality, because nowadays, although science cannot solve all problems, it is highly trusted and considered very authoritative. People all over the world feel that even things that aren't scientific are still regarded as scientific. But in some respects, at least for now, I believe Tibetan Buddhism has a scientific aspect. For example, Tibetan Buddhism has its own astronomy. So what is this astronomy like exactly? It is essentially related to calendrical calculations. For instance, the calendar for the year, they use a wooden board, and on this board, in the traditional Tibetan way, they sprinkle some white ash on top and then make calculations on the ash. No other tools are needed, not even a computer or any other scientific instruments. We have an astronomy researcher in our region who once at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences was conducting research together with professors from the astronomy department. He used a wooden block to calculate, and at first everyone looked down on him and mocked him, saying that such traditions were backward. Later in the budget process, he was even faster than a computer. These people are still alive today. Even now, in our Larung Valley, there are still some Khenpos like this. They also use this exact method for calculations. Our Larung Gar calendar for now in Tibet, it is also very well known. A few Khenpos can make calculations in a very short time and get the results without needing anything else. This includes things like the 360-day leap month, solar eclipses, lunar eclipses, and so on. All of it matches exactly with the calculations from modern observatories. Regarding this in particular, there are also some wooden blocks and sticks inserted into the ground, and no matter where you are, you can always use the shadow of the sun together with the markings below them to make math. This is my teacher, His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok, also wrote in his works. We used to experiment with this ourselves. The minutes on our wristwatches, which is matched the calculations here almost exactly in every way. Maybe you don't believe this, and that's fine if you don't, but I hope you will study it. It's really worthwhile. Just from the perspective of astronomy, there are indeed many remarkable aspects. Today I find the merits of Tibetan Buddhism interesting. It feels that it's promotion, but that's not really what I intend to talk about actually. Because even if I don't mention these things, they are facts nonetheless. But since you asked me to talk about some of its appealing aspects, I do believe it has many strengths in various areas. Another thing is that within Tibetan Buddhism, there is its own psychological science. I once read of someone from Yugoslavia, and her named simply Moakanin. She specializes in psychology. She wrote a book which is called Jung's Psychology in Tibetan Buddhism. This book is about that she discusses similarities and differences in Eastern and Western psychologies. In the end, she points out that Jung regarded this kind of psychological science as a means for self-discovery, self-integration, and self-fulfillment, whereas Tibetan Buddhism views Buddha nature as something that can ultimately be fully realized, bringing benefit to all sentient beings. Through some of her analysis, it is indeed the case that psychological science, as everyone knows, that the psychology, although Western philosophy, also contains elements of it. And the entirety of modern psychological science has only existed for just over 100 years. But the true psychological science of Tibetan Buddhism had already matured quite long ago. This can be clearly seen in many of Padmasambhava's teachings. It's evident from them. Therefore, it is able to address many current psychological issues, including depression and autism, as well as many other psychological problems, through practicing the esoteric teachings of Tibetan Buddhism, and later they have released. Among the many Buddhist practitioners from both East and West that I have encountered, they used to suffer and felt deep pain inside. Netherlands has same issues as well. Some people say it's because of the weather. In winter there's no sun for long, so psychological issues arise. But I think it might not actually be because of the weather. Nowadays, because of people's various extremely complex thoughts are the real cause. For problems like these, many of them can be addressed with certain psychological adjustment methods. Fifth point, Tibetan Buddhism has inclusivity. Some forms of Buddhism can be rather conservative, even though they are the original traditions. But to people living in this century today, they seem conservative. There are many restrictions in terms of thought, behavior, and other aspects with all sorts of rules and regulations. As a result, especially for some young people and city dwellers, they may feel intimidated at first. However, in Tibetan Buddhism, there are many stages of practice. At the beginning, there is some conservatism in behavior, as well as certain restraints and controls. Step by step, upon reaching a certain level of realization, if they can enlighten the true nature of all phenomena, and at that point, within their own nature, there is nothing to be bound by, nothing to attach to, nothing to accept or reject. Sometimes I think, for example, in your country, the Netherlands, there are things that many other countries might strongly reject, including drug use and homosexuality, as well as many other ideas that are quite often and in many cases are rejected. But here, some people don't see them as such serious issues. In Tibetan Buddhism, indeed, when one reaches a certain level of realization, some behaviors that are generally rejected by society, in their eyes, there is actually no grasping and abandoning. I once read a biography about Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche. On one occasion, of course, there are two versions of his biography that differ a bit. And in one version, it says that once he brought, in fact, a lot of marijuana and took his disciples with him. At first, they all used drugs together, slowly, while putting drugs and marijuana, just throw it all into the fire. While singing, he had them let go of their self-attachment. To ordinary religious practitioners or other people, this seems rather strange. But in fact, if we truly look from the perspective of our own nature, from the standpoint of recognizing the nature of mind in Tibetan Buddhism, then whether it's actually poison or medicine, whether it's white or black, there is essentially no difference at their core. So, in the various countries where we humans live, regarding traditions and attachments, there may be many things that are hard to understand or accept. But in reality, if we truly gain insight, there are many problems can be easily resolved. It's just a matter of different habits. Everything has its own rationality for existing. The last thing I want to say, which is many lamas in Tibetan Buddhism, and of course in other religions and in Buddhism too, there are also many lamas who possess blessings. However, the lamas in Tibetan Buddhism place great importance on blessings. Some lamas have a certain personal charisma and they can attract many people. Even just a smile from them, or even a very simple teaching from him, or even a very ordinary blessed object they give, can possess boundless power. Those without religious faith here may not believe this, but we place great importance on faith in our lamas and teachers. A couple of days ago in Italy, Sogyal Rinpoche, author of the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, as we were talking, we started discussing our own lamas. I told him about blessed objects my lama had left me and showed him the prayer beads I wear around my neck. It turned out he had more on his neck, each one from this lama or that lama. There were so many, really a great number. Maybe you don't quite understand about this. It's like how in the secular world, I'm not sure if it's the same, many people wear rings when they get married. Some people value that. But maybe we do not really understand it, not knowing what the significance is. Actually, everyone has different values. For us, we place great importance on the blessed objects given by our lamas. In short, in Tibetan Buddhism, we especially value the lama's direct pointing out of the nature of mind to you, through a simple word from the Lama. So when you recognize the true nature of your own mind, all your suffering completely vanishes forever. And no matter where you live, it becomes a truly joyful world. Moreover, around yourself, there will be a kind of magnetic field of energy. At any given time and in any place on earth, you can help countless sentient beings. That's why we yearn for and deeply wish to recognize the nature of mind. I think the main attraction of Tibetan Buddhism ultimately lies in realizing the nature of mind. This is my answer to the PhD student.